Hi everyone, Miss Gooch here, and this is a video all about the poem Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Let's begin by learning a little bit more about the poem and the poet. So it was written about the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War. The Crimean War was fought in the late 1800s, so before World War I. And in this battle, 247 of the 637 men that went into it were killed or injured. And the mission was just suicidal. There was no hope of them ever winning, and that just became clear with the number of casualties. And when Tennyson read about this battle in the London Times, he felt absolutely compelled to write a poem about it. Tennyson was not a soldier himself in the war, but he was at home and he wanted to share these soldier stories. He wanted people to know about their bravery and about the battle that they fought. And at the time that he was writing, Tennyson was the poet laureate, and that just means that the national poet that's been selected by the monarch, so by the king or the queen, to write about poems about what's happening in the country, about momentous events, those sorts of things. But it did mean that he couldn't be too critical of the war because he was selected by the queen to write on her behalf in a way. So that we'll see him be a little bit critical, and we'll pick up on that as we read the poem, but he can't be too out there like some of the other poems and poets in the collection. How does the poem link to power and conflict then? Well, it presents the power and bravery of the soldiers, but it also does question the purpose of war. Like I said, not in a really out there way, but there is some questions about the purpose of war. Let's read the poem together, and then we can start to break it down. So here we go. Half a league, half a league, half a league onwards, all in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not, though the soldiers knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well, into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabring the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery's smoke, right through the line they broke, Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the world charge they made, all the world wondered. Honour the charge they made, honour the Light Brigade, noble 600. So let's have a look at this poem in chunks. We're going to look at 2 stanzas at a time. So here are the first 2 stanzas. And you can see it opens with this kind of rhythm, half a league, half a league, half a league onwards, almost like the marching of soldiers or the hooves of the horses. So you get that sense straight away of the soldiers entering into the battle, and straight away Tennyson calls it the Valley of Death, suggesting, well, right from the outset, that the soldiers are going to die, that there's not much hope here, that if they're riding into the Valley of Death, it's unlikely they're going to ride back. And he calls them throughout the poem, you will have noticed, the 600. And again says the Valley of Death. This becomes a repeated kind of image. And in this second stanza here, he says, was there a man dismayed? So dismay is sort of sadness, and he's questioning, how did these soldiers feel? He's trying to understand what they were feeling. And then he says not. So no, they weren't dismayed, even though they knew that someone had blundered, and a blunder is a mistake. So what he's saying here is that even though the soldiers did know that someone had blundered, They weren't upset. They carried on regardless. So this makes them even braver. And then we have this phrase here, quite a famous phrase: theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. So all the soldiers' job was to do in this battle was to die in that valley of death. It's that repeated image again. And these two stanzas are kind of setting up the battle. The next two stanzas are in the battle. So we have it here: cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them. Everywhere, they're completely surrounded. And we've got lots of verbs as well. So stormed, volleyed and thundered. Ooh, excuse me. Flashed, sabering. So a saber is a type of sword. So they're being shot at with cannons. There's guns, there's knives and swords. So it's just absolute chaos. And this is what these two stanzas are trying to convey to you. And you'll notice as well that it's not now the valley of death, it's the jaws of death and the mouth of hell. So that image develops to become arguably even more intense. And then by the end of this stanza, it says, then they rode back, but not the 600. So we could see this repetition here, the not and the not again, as like almost choking on the words. So feeling a bit upset that these soldiers, these brave soldiers, aren't going to return. And then the final two stanzas are about the return journey from the battle. So again, we've got this nice repetition of imagery: cannon to the right, cannon to the left, cannon behind them because they're coming away. And they were stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. So even as they're returning from war, people are still falling, people are still dying. And because we're getting to the end of the poem, Tennyson wants the takeaway message to be: look how well they fought. They came back from the jaws of death and the mouth of hell. And in this final, that's the mouth of hell there. And in this final stanza, it's Tennyson's lasting message. He wants people to honour the charge of the Light Brigade and honour what they did for us all, and he calls them noble. So this is his take-home message. You know, these soldiers were so brave, and we can't ever let their glory and their memory fade. And that's what this poem is aiming to do, to keep the memory of these brave soldiers alive. Now let's return to these central arguments now that we've looked at the poem in a little bit more detail. So we can definitely see how the poem presents the soldiers, the power of the soldiers and their bravery. And we can also see at little moments where the poem questions the purpose of war. And we're going to look at these two in a little bit more detail now. So starting off with the bravery of the soldiers, thinking about some of this imagery here: the valley of death, the mouth of hell, and coming back from the mouth of hell. These phrases show their bravery because death and hell are both terrifying. And thinking about the time it was written, hell would have been especially terrifying because people were very religious. So to these people and these soldiers, hell is the worst possible place you can go to. So the fact that they go into it like willingly and they choose to fight this battle shows just how brave they were. And then the fact that they come back from it is almost like a miracle. So we could almost link this to Jesus coming back from the dead. So they walk into the valley of death and the mouth of hell, and any soldiers that return, it's amazing, it's a miracle. And then let's have a think about some of these verbs that are used. So as I said, all the verbs used show aggression and power. Like the Light Brigade, are a force that cannot be stopped. And particularly these two words, thundered and stormed, they could link to weather, emphasising how powerful the men were. Like weather, they thundered in, they stormed in, and they flashed their swords, and they fought really bravely and well. But the poem does question the purpose of war, as I've said. So looking back at this line we talked about before, someone's made a mistake. Someone in power has made a wrong decision, and now the soldiers have to pay the price. Notice how Tennyson doesn't point the finger at anyone, he just says someone. That's because he couldn't be too critical. Remember, he's the poet laureate. And again, like I said, the only thing these soldiers exist for is to do and die. So it shows how helpless these soldiers really are, and presents them as disposable to the government. Like, oh, don't worry about them, they're just soldiers, they can go and die as long as we win the war, which they actually lost, the Crimean War, sadly. So a lot of soldiers' lives were lost for ultimately nothing. And this phrase we didn't pick up on before, all the world wondered. So that determiner all does suggest that no one understands why people in power made this decision, because this word wondered could mean two things. So it could mean that the people were amazed at the bravery of the Light Brigade, like they wonder how they did it, like, wow, they're amazing. Or it could be the people wondering why they've been sent into battle in the first place. I wonder why people have made that decision when it was such a bad one. So thinking about that double meaning can be really interesting for analysis. And then finally, to finish off with thinking about the structure, as I mentioned, the rhythm of this poem, half a league, half a league, half a league onwards into the valley of death rode the 600. That rhythm reflects maybe the sound of horses galloping, and it could show how the battle could not be stopped, and also how quickly they rushed into it. Maybe even how quickly the decision was made without thinking it through. They just charged on in there without thinking about the consequences. And now it's over to you. So it's time to test your knowledge. Pick one of these essay questions and, using the quotations that I've explored in this video, write yourself an answer. So how does Tennyson convey the bravery of the soldiers? How does Tennyson question the purpose of war? Or, for a shine question, bit of an evaluation here, to what extent is Tennyson critical of the war? So have a go at answering one of those questions, send it over to your teacher and tune in for the next video.